Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Future-proofing our education systems and stress testing them against potential shocks. Many would agree that has become the urgent tasks of education today. As extreme weather events, disruptive technologies, and a lingering pandemic are all challenging our lives today. But how can I do it? And how can you do it? I asked about that to Andreas Schleicher, Director of Education and Skills at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, otherwise known as OECD, who just put out the latest edition of Trends Shaping Education. I'm joined by Andreas Schleicher, the Director of Education with OECD. What a pleasure to see you, Andrea.
Nice to see you, Tian Wei.
Like every year, this year you're putting out a big report about the challenges and opportunities of education for the world. Tell me more about the major challenge under COVID.
Well, at the moment, the pandemic has deeply disrupted our lives and education in many countries, but it has also been a catalyst for many innovations in the education sector. If you think about technology, a few years ago, we used to use technology to conserve existing practice. Now, technology is really transforming educational practice, making learning more granular, more interactive, more participative. It gives teachers better tools to see how different students learn differently and engage with this. It gives parents ways to connect to their children. So you can see actually technology challenging us, but also providing important opportunities. The bigger question for us is how do we prepare young people for a technology-driven world? We know how to educate second-class robots, people who are good at repeating what we told them. But what will make us human in a world in which the kind of things that are easy to teach and easy to test have become easy to digitize, to automate. So this is clearly one of the other challenges. Technology is also driving innovation. Actually, China has been incredibly successful to create new ideas, new patents, new kind of products, services. Demography is another trend. Our populations become older and actually very rapidly so, and that means we will have fewer young people to sustain our economies. And that means education will matter more. We cannot lose a single child in the educational progress. In the past, a few people needed to be successful. Now we need everybody to succeed in education. So I think that's another. Demography is a very important trend. The change in lifestyles as well. People live differently. They want to sort of integrate work and life in new ways. And again, we used to sort of separate education and working, and now good places of work have also become good places of learning. Right. And we see this integration. So there are many fundamental trends shaping the future of education with opportunities and challenges.
Right. You talked about in that report so-called future-proof projects and future-proof plans for education. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think we cannot predict the future, but if we become better to anticipate multiple versions of the future, then we will be better prepared for the future that eventually arrives. So the best way to future-proof your education system is really to, prepare yourself for alternative scenarios, to make education more resilient. Education used to be to keep the world in balance. Today, education needs to be to help people live in an imbalanced world. We call that, cognitive, social, and emotional resilience of people. Can I live with uncertainty? Can I navigate ambiguity? Do I have the kind of social and emotional persistence to live through difficulties, to reinvent myself when the context changes? So that is really what future-proofing is about. As an educator, as a teacher, it's no longer enough to be a good instructor, to teach people something. you also need to be a good coach, a good mentor, a good facilitator. You need to understand, who are my students? Who do they want to become? How I can help them actually to become that version, that best version of themselves. So again, I think resilience, future proofing is about, being ready to be open for alternatives.
Beautifully articulated. Andrea, some of the educator might say, well, it's easy to talk about these concepts while you are sitting in the office, but we are in the classrooms and we are facing the students maybe digitally as well during the COVID time. So what does that mean for an ordinary teacher that are in this current education system? If you were one of them, how would you, shape the way you educate, the content that you educate, and the context with which you educate, the attitude that you can educate? Tell me more about how would you function if you were one of them?
Actually, I must say that Chinese teachers have often really impressed me. And the reason for that is not just because they teach very well, but because they take a real interest in their student. They spend time with their students outside the classroom. They know who their children are, who they want to become, and support them in that. And I think that is really, really important. You cannot teach for the 21st century in a classroom if you do not have that strong relationship with each and every of your individual students. If you do not understand how your different students learn differently, and I do actually think that in the case of China, the teaching hours are a little bit lower than in many other countries, but teachers spend therefore so much time working and engaging with students. And I do think that is really the answer to your question. It is not just about, the content I need to transmit in the classroom, but to build that student-teacher relationship that will help sustain the learning, because we should in the future think less about teaching and more about learning. How do I enable and empower a student to set their own goals, to sort of pursue their own learning strategies, to find out, how they can overcome difficulties? This is really what happened in the pandemic. The students who used to be spoon-fed by their teachers, they were stuck when they had to learn on their own. The students who had actually managed their own learning strategies, who had that motivation, that intrinsic capacity to learn, they were very successful. So again, as a teacher, build a very strong relationship with your students, and I think you'll be very successful in the classroom.
One of the things is COVID. It's really shaping us right now, and it's likely to continue at least for some years before things going back to normal, or will we ever go back to normal, quote unquote. And with the COVID in the backdrop, what have changed in the education? Do you think that both the educators and those who provide context for the educators and the students will be able to catch up with that on time? What are some of the already best practices that you have seen in the world, and that could be shared with the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think the COVID pandemic obviously has seriously disrupted not just the operation of education, but also our thinking of education. In a way, we see that the future is less about teaching students something and more about providing them with a reliable compass and the tools to navigate with confidence through a world that is volatile, that is complex, that is ambiguous, that is really difficult. And I think that's the lesson really from COVID, that we cannot.
What is that reliable compass?
It's a tool that tells you, as a student, what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is not true. In the past, you were taught with a textbook, and you could rely on the textbook to tell you the truth. It was carefully curated, carefully authored. Today, young people read through WeChat, and they read through Google, and they get, 100,000 answers to their question, and nobody tells them what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is not true. Before COVID, you had your students in front of you as a teacher. You could actually talk to them directly. During COVID, when the schools were closed, well, the students were sitting in front of a computer. You as a teacher had to give them those tools to learn on their own, to actually distinguish right from wrong, fact from opinion. And I think in the future, that will be more and more important. You know, the COVID crisis is just a big accelerator for many trends that already happened, a big amplifier of many trends. Students who are well prepared, you know, maybe they have been super empowered by this crisis. For them, you know, learning on their own became something really interesting. My students who were not well prepared, they were left really badly behind. I think one of the big challenges after this pandemic is to make education more inclusive, to find better ways to cater for different approaches to learning.
Andrea, you talk about two things which I would love to pick up. One is you said after this pandemic, we really have to rethink about education. But I'm afraid that we do not have that luxury now, because it is during this pandemic we have to think about it and do it now. So do you see our ability, I mean, the world as a whole, of course, you are working mainly in OECD countries, but you've been traveling around the world to developing countries like China and India. Do you think we have these capabilities now?
Well, you know, it's already happening. You have many students who go back to their teachers and say, you know, when the schools were closed, I found so many interesting learning resources. I really like to learn on my own. I really developed that kind of interest in the school subject. You know, can we not do that differently in our lessons? And, you know, you see many teachers going back to their school principals saying, you know, during the pandemic, I was not just a good instructor. I became a really good coach for my students. I became a good mentor, a good facilitator, a good social worker, a good psychologist. I really want to take on a more holistic role as an educator, not just as a teacher. You can see many school leaders going back to their administrators saying, you know, during this pandemic, we became really creative to design innovative learning environments. We started to reconfigure the spaces, the people, the time, and the technology. Can we not do things differently in the school system? So actually, I think, you know, we are seeing many innovations during the pandemic. The pandemic has empowered people to think about education differently and to, you know, out of the necessary teachers. You know, before the pandemic, technology was often just, you know, a foreign tool in the classroom. Now it's become an integral way of working. You know, they have also, teachers have gone to co-create learning with their students sometimes. You know, rather than, you know, I know what I teach, you learn. Teachers have worked with their students to actually redesign learning. So I think, you know, there is a lot of really interesting change happening at this moment. The COVID crisis really has been a catalyst for innovation, an amplifier for this.
It's a catalyst for a lot of things, isn't it, Andrea? Another thing, though, people have also noticed with the application of technology, it is bringing us a lot of convenience and great surprises. But at the same time, it making us ever more thirsty for real person-to-person interaction. Well, I'm talking to you right now, how much I wish I could be sitting in the same office I did years ago at the OECD organization, talking to you directly, Andrea. So what about that part? Are we going to miss that part in the future?
Well, you know, I think the good thing is that the crisis has made us aware of the importance of human relationships, of the social and emotional development. Before the crisis, you know, technology was gradually taking over. You know, algorithms started to tell you when to turn left and turn right in the street, you know, what you eat and what you don't eat, and so on. And I think this crisis has brought back actually our awareness, what it means to be human. That idea of personal relationships, and in education too. You know, the most successful teachers during this crisis were the ones, you know, who had that personal relationship with their students, who understood, you know, who their students are, who they want to become, you know, how they can accompany them during their lives. So actually, I think, and I hope that will stay with us, that we will not forget that when things turn back to normal, but that we will understand, you know, we should, in the time of artificial intelligence, we should push ourselves much harder to better understand what makes us human. We can use the artificial intelligence to, you know, empower us to do more things, better things. But we should not forget that we are really, I think, our human capacity is what will make our difference. We should not forget, that beyond mathematics and science, it's our creative capacities. It's our capacity to relate to other people, to live with ourselves, to live with people who are different from us, to live with the planet, to find, the right balance between the future and the present. I do hope that this crisis has woken us up and that we will retain that.
Technologies are likely to be the areas where, political decoupling might be happening. So that's bringing another extra layer of burden and difficulty to the education that if it is supposed to advocate fairer understanding of the world, more sophisticated understanding of the world. Andrea.
Yeah, I also believe that education can really be the antidote to those unfortunate trends today, like the decoupling, the kind of political polarization. All of those unhealthy trends are actually ones that education can bridge. Education can build that, interest to learn about other people, other cultures, other ways of thinking. And I do hope that education will help all of us, to live together as a world. Most of the challenges of humanity are not ending with national borders. They are advancing. If you think about climate change, if you think technology, even the pandemic, we either solve them together as a human species or none of us will solve them. So I do think education has a very, very important role to play to connect people, cities, continents.
Andrea, was a pleasure. Thank you so much for briefing us about the importance of this report and particularly importantly, to make us more aware of what is still ahead of us to be future-proofing, as you said.
Thank you so much. And I do hope I will be able to catch up in person very soon.
Let's hope that. Thank you so much. All the best, Andrea.
Thank you.